some practical advices about how the body can move the spin, what is quite interesting always for me. I brought stuff. You can all see and hear me. Years ago, I got involved with hand spinning as one of the basic techniques, making the building block of almost all the textiles that we have in archaeology, and I haven't been able to turn away from it since. So today I get to complain for 20 minutes about how hard things can be when you're looking at these types of yarn. I will start with the very basic. It does not matter which spinning tool or technique you use. Yarn is always the same thing. It's fibers drawn out into a band, and then there's twist added, and the twist makes the fibers into thread. It's like the glue. It's pressing the fiber surface on top of each other, and that results in friction. And this friction is what keeps the yarn together. Now, within reason, more friction, as in more twist, means a more stable yarn. And obviously, since this is due to the fiber surface pressing onto each other, there is a difference on the amount of twist needed that depends on fiber surface. So if you have smooth fibers, like cotton fibers for instance, you will need more twist than if you have rough fibers. If your fiber has the same length, because that is another influence, you will need more twist for shorter fibers and less twist for longer fibers. And there is a third influence, and that is the amount of fibers. If you have thin yarn and thus very few fibers, you will again need more twist for the same stability than if you have a lot of fibers for a thick yarn. So you insert that twist with the spinning technique and tool of your choice. And there is a plethora of spinning techniques. And they will depend on the tradition, the region, the tools, the fiber material, and the yarns that you want to make for a specific purpose. And if you have a nice afternoon, I can recommend going on YouTube and looking for spinning techniques around the world, and you will be amazed at how many different methods there are to insert twist into fibers. It's really, really fascinating. There is a very typical, sort of iconic technique today that most of us think of when we think of hand spindle spinning, and that is what I call long suspended. Now we are on the wonderful topic of textile terminology, which you surely also all love, just like I do. And in some cases there are no proper terms, so you get to make up your own. I call this spinning long suspended because the spindle hangs suspended from a thread that is rather long, and it moves down towards the floor. In this case my hands move up so you can still see the spindle, and eventually it arrives at the floor and you wind up the yarn and then start over. Usually we have the fiber held in one hand, and I hope you have seen there's a typical body position and a typical stance to it. Both hands stay close together, and periodically you give the spindle a flick so it doesn't stop turning, which would be bad, because then it turns back and then your yarn breaks. If you look at very old depictions, like at those of these Hallstatt spinning women, we see a very similar spinning technique. The only difference is that these ladies have a distaff, very clearly seen here. So it's a short handheld distaff, and the rest of the technique is basically the same, only your fiber is held on the stick. So this would be the technique of spinning long suspended with a short distaff, And you don't only find it on Hallstatt depictions, you also find it on pictures like this jug, found in Italy, made in Greece, from 490 to 470 BC. And you can very, very clearly, very nicely see that short distaff and the spindle hanging from the long thread. Now, at some point, there is a change in spinning style, because if you look at this late medieval picture, you see a completely different body position and a completely different movement. And we have that on many, many, many pictures, and it's very, very characteristic. So there's actually two types that look like this, and they are relevant to medieval European spinning in the hand and spinning short suspended, is what I call them. Now, for both these variations, you always have a distaff, and on the medieval pictures, it's usually long. I only brought a short one due to luggage restrictions. You always have one hand close to the distaff, and the other hand is close to the spindle. The spindle hand moves away from the distaff and draws the fibers, and that comes the tricky bit, because I'm really not good with the hand distaff. So the spindle hand moves away from the distaff, keeps the spindle turning, and the other hand controls the fiber flow at the distaff. So this would be spinning short suspended. The difference between the two variations is that in the short suspended, you can see the spindle hanging underneath my spindle hand, and I keep flicking it so it turns at very high speed. I get a very fast insertion of a lot of twist, which is nice if you want a firmly spun yarn and you don't want to spend all your life making it, which is also nice. On the other hand, there is a method where you just keep the spindle in the hand and you turn it between your fingers continuously. Okay, you can all imagine me. I can turn without the spindle. Thank you, Katrin. You just turn it in your hand. This means you get a relatively slow insertion of twist, but it's very controlled. So if you have very long fibers where you don't need a lot of twist to make a stable yarn, this would be a very suitable technique. On pictures like the one shown here, you can't tell whether the lady is spinning short suspended and the spindle tip just hides behind her fingers, or whether she is turning the spindle in hand. And usually the distaff depictions are not naturalistic enough to give us a proper idea of the actual fiber on the distaff. But there are pictures that clearly show that there is short suspended spinning going on, because you can eke out a little more length per make when you let the spindle go lower than your hand at the very end. And this is what is shown here. So this is clearly short suspended spin. Now, twist has a lot of influence on the yarn and the fabric. And I have listed some of the influences of twist here. Usually in the historical fabrics, there is more twist than in modern fabrics, due to a range of reasons. One of the typical effects or classical effects of high twist yarn is that it's very durable, it wears down very slowly, and with a glossy surface there is little insulation, or less insulation than in soft spun yarn, because you have less air trapped in between the fibers. It feels rather hard and smooth, and it tends to kink up strongly. There is also usually no pilling and little felting. The sturdy yarn with a lot of twist also has effects on cloth, and they can be, as I discovered only recently, be very, very spectacular. One of the problems that you have when you add too little twist is on warp you will get breakage of yarns. And if you look at those two examples of thread, you might be able to see a difference I think it's rather slight, but the top one turned out to have insufficient twist for being a warp yarn, while the bottom one was perfectly fine. I have measured the angle on these two, and I hope you can see the tiny numbers. I have not found a really good measurement program yet. The difference is very slight. So, yes. I used to be in love with the spinning angle as a helper, and evil things happened. So, yes, that is the warp yarn problem. So you want to have enough twist for your warp yarn. You also want to have sufficient twist for your weft yarn, but not too much, because there is a limit on how much tension you can keep on your warp yarn. And the more twist you have in the yarn, the more the yarn will tend to kink up, so it might cause trouble. Also, with very high twist yarns, it can be hard to get a dense weave, because they are pretty hard. Now, obviously twist is really, really, really important. So it would be nice to have a good way to measure it. Modern industry and modern hand spinners have a very handy way. They take a length of yarn, fix one end, and then they untwist it, counting the twists, and they measure the length beforehand, so they have a measure of twists per inch, for instance. Now, if you try to do that with an archaeological yarn, you will get into trouble. So we need a destruction-free method, and there is one. We look at the yarn, and we determine the twist angle or spinning angle. The assumption is that if you have fibers that are lying in a straight line and at a twist, you can see how they start to slant up more and more. And this slant can be measured, and it will give you an indication of the amount of twist. This works really nicely for industrial yarns, which are drafted first. So you have fibers lying nicely parallel all along, and then they are twisted up. But when you are drafting for hand spinning, you have, instead of a band, what is called a drafting triangle. And if it looks good, it looks like this. But while you're spinning, it can also look like this. And like this. And like this. And these pictures were all taken in the course of about 10 minutes or so. So the drafting changes, and the angles at which the individual fibers come into the yarn also change. And this can mean that you get fibers on the surface that are lying at an angle that has not so much to do with the actual amount of twist that you have been inserting into your yarn, which is kind of troublesome. So the spinning angle was sort of starting to let me down, and I was suspecting also that there might be an influence on how the measurements are taken and who's taking the measurements. So at the last European Textile Forum, which is a small conference with heavy emphasis on the crafts aspect, I bullied several participants into taking yarn spinning angle measurements. They used the same pictures with the same software, and they had the same person giving them the exact same instructions for the measuring, and then they were left to measure the spinning angle. And one of the examples was this piece of yarn, which is my hand spun. And here you see 3 instances of different people measuring spinning angles, and here you see another 3, and now comes the spectacular bit. The red square is a little more than 1 millimeter, and 2 persons measured the spinning angle in that space of 20.8 and 49.8 degrees respectively. And yeah, this is when my heart broke, and spinning angle and me, our love affair was ended. It is really, really important to get a handle or an impression of the amount of twist though, because it does things to the fabric. So if any of you has an idea on what to do about this tiny little problem that I now have, please let me know. So here you see 3 examples, and that was another side effect of a little test we did in the forum where we tried to look at dye penetration in fabrics. These test runs involved having fabrics of different density and with different spinning angles, different amounts of twist. So you can see high twist, medium twist, lower twist yarns, all Z spun, all in plain weave here. And here's a close-up, and I hope you can see that the fabric does change, it has a different effect. I've also been told by the two weavers that in high twist yarns, the shape was opening very nicely and it was very cooperative, while the weft yarns on the lower twist were much nicer to handle. So these are all Z-spun. You get an effect. You can get that even nicer and better if you have mixed spinning in woven weft. So here is an example of a plain weave, and that is fresh off the loom, still warm, so to say, plain weave, and if you wash it, you get this. And if you take a walk on it for about an hour, fooling it, you get this. It's a beautiful tracking effect. You get diagonal lines, it looks spectacular. It is a simple plain weave, and you achieve this effect just by the mixed spinning with a relatively high twist. And you also get nice effects on twill. So this is a 2-2 twill. Now, I would have expected a 2-2 twill to look the same on both sides. This one does not. I have the piece here. If you have a tiny little bit of twill fabric and you flip it over, you look at it differently than when you have a larger amount. So this really pops more when you have a big piece. And on one side, you have a clearly, nicely visible diagonal twill structure, and that's where the spinning angle, the different light diffraction on the yarns, complements the twill angle, and on the other side it sort of negates the twill angle, and you get a fabric that looks like not a twill. And it can be even more spectacular. This is a very open weave, also fresh off the loom, plain weave, with an extremely high twist yarn. So you can overspin your yarns. And when you put this in water, you get a crepe effect. And it's a very, very spectacular crepe effect. So this was woven to 80 centimeters of width, and it shrinks to about half, so you can still stretch it out again. That was surprising. And it's not only possible to do that in plain weave, you can also do it in 2-2 twill, which you can see here. Now, this is mixed spinning. It was Z-warp, S-weft, and at the end of the weave of the piece, the weaver ran out of the S-weft yarn, but she had some extra warp yarn, and there was some extra warp left, so she wove a few centimeters in ZZ, and you can see the difference here. Which was also kind of a surprise. It's not lying completely flat, but compared to the crappy bit, it's very flat. And it's not getting better from here, because what I also discovered during this project is that the twist angle will do things, even after you're finished spinning, and you think everything is nice and peachy keen. If you, you spin your yarn, you put it onto a skein, and then you set the twist. And this is traditionally, or one of the methods that you can do it, is put it into hot water and then hang up the skein to dry. If you are in a bit of a pinch time-wise, you can also take a common household steaming appliance and just steam it up. And the nice thing about that is that you can actually see the yarns move as you steam them. So I noticed that, and I made a little marking thread around one of the yarns. And this is before steaming, and this is after steaming. So it turned around, turned its back towards me, and this is what happens along all of the yarns. So it's like it's alive. They are really, really moving. And I also have the impression that you get another change of spinning angle when you are weaving, even though technically you shouldn't, because you're not inserting more twist, or you're not taking out twist. But in our case, with the process that we had, me as the spinner and my colleague, the weaver, I have the impression that it reduced the amount of twist in the warp and it added to the amount of twist in the weft. I haven't done enough good measurements yet, but that's my impression. And so more testing can be done here. So, conclusions. Yarn twist and the twist direction have an enormous effect regarding the fabric. And obviously, if you're trying to do reconstructions, if you're trying to get an impression on how historical fabrics work through recreating them, you will have to take this into account. But that means you will have to measure the twist and recreate the amount of twist, and that's not as easy as it seems. I was thinking about what would help me for reconstructions, data that you could take. It's never bad to say something about the spinning direction. Obviously, you need that. It's also not bad to add in the twist angles until we find something much better. Yarn diameter in warp and weft is also important, but what helps me personally most to sort of get an impression of the fabric and try to get close to it when I go for a reconstruction, apart from knowing about the fiber diameter and the fiber length, which, yes, it's hard to measure, is having good photographs, large, good close-ups where you can actually see the structure of the fabric and the twist in the yarns, and preferably on both sides. And large because there's always inconsistencies and it's never completely even, so you want to also have an impression of the amount of unevenness. And some more conclusions. It's really hard to document textiles in a way to easily allow the reconstruction of them. It's a little bit like making a blind man draw something, I feel like. And the other thing is that if you have a textile, even one that we would consider simple or basic, it is a process that demands a lot of experience, and these simple textiles, we should really not underestimate them. So, thank you very much for your attention, for enduring my complaints, and thank you to a lot of people who helped with things. And if you're interested into the European Textile Forum, we will have another one next November. Please come and talk to me. We're always happy to have more people. Thank you.